Now first, Afghans desperate to escape Taliban rule have been trying to board evacuation flights out of the country, and videos of the chaotic scenes have been seen across the world. Joe Biden now insists this was always the plan, but how will the public see it? To discuss, I'm joined by our Deputy Editor Freddy Gray, who writes this week's politics column on the issue, and by Ben Page, CEO of polling from Ipsos MORI. Freddy, Ben, thank you for joining us today on Spectator TV. Freddy, first, you say Biden has learnt a valuable lesson from Donald Trump. Can you explain?
Well, I think that obviously Biden is getting a lot of political flack about his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan and his insistence that it was the right thing to do. And I think that the immediate polls, I'm sure Ben, who's about to join us, will tell us a bit more about that, but I think the immediate polls show that there's a slight decline in his job approval rating. But I think what Biden has understood is that in triggering the sort of media apoplexy, the kind of global media anger that he has in the last few days, you can quite often win over a lot of voters. And I don't want to sort of get involved in the kind of morality of Afghanistan and those issues. I want to just talk about in terms of what Biden's thinking politically. I think that a lot of voters will be thinking the pompous journalists, the sort of the elite ruling class that we don't like, and it's not just Trumpist voters that think like that, it's a broad swathe of American voters. They'll be thinking, if they're so angry about what Biden's doing, and we generally support the idea of withdrawing from Afghanistan, which they do, I think it could end up being a net positive for Joe Biden.
Ben, do you think it could be a net positive? How are those polling numbers looking for him?
Well, his overall support levels dropped to the lowest point in his presidency, but it's only down 7 points from 53 to 46% approval. So he's still doing rather better than Donald Trump did at any point. But it's fair to say that his ratings on handling the war are now the lowest of any president during the last 20 years. But overall, I think in one sense I agree with Freddie, because for most Americans, Afghanistan is a faraway place about which they know very little indeed. And the majority of Americans say that they had to leave at some point. 61% say that they were right to proceed with the withdrawal on the schedule that had been announced. And although 3/4 want them to intervene in humanitarian terms and to secure the airport and do all the things that they're now doing, only around half actually want to see any sort of major military involvement there again. So, I mean, the American public are a bit mixed, but the balance of opinion is that he's done the right thing. So, provided there aren't too many casualties and there isn't another 9/11, he's probably got away with it.
And Freddie, when Joe Biden spoke for the first time publicly since the situation in Afghanistan descended as it did, you saw a pitch that was very much focused on the domestic audience. It appalled many in the international community. But do you think ultimately the White House is just not particularly bothered what many of Biden's normal allies think? He took a long time to speak, for example, to other leaders.
I think that's true. I mean, certainly there were a lot of things Biden has got wrong. I mean, it took him ages to speak. He apparently has not called any other leaders. He's generally looked as though he's a little bit rash and unconcerned. So it does look as though his focus is uniquely on the domestic situation. And again, I think Americans are it's difficult to try and explain the American psyche, because I think they kind of swing between, historically they swing between being far too eager to involve themselves in world affairs and too reluctant. And you saw after Vietnam and Saigon, which everyone's been talking about this week, that American people were very keen to sort of just wash their hands of it, move on, not exactly pretend it never happened, but just move on and look forward. And I think Biden may be more in tune with the American mood than a lot of the media are. And I do understand what Ben's saying, that there is a change in the polls at the moment, but it would be pretty surprising if there wasn't, given the barrage of negative headlines that's going on.
I think there's the key thing. There's another element here, Freddie, which is I think that Americans don't like losing, regardless of the rights and wrongs of it. So, I mean, seeing people being lifted out of embassies and on the back of Chinooks with raging mobs outside and all that type of thing is obviously that isn't good. But you're right. America is withdrawing. For most Americans, they like to, America first with Donald Trump, and this, in some ways, is an element of continuation of that.
I agree, Ben. They don't like losing. They also don't like never winning, which I think has been something that's defined American policy for too many decades now.
So, Ben, what do you think could change the polls of Biden? You mentioned a terror attack back home, but also, despite the sweet talk from the Taliban about supporting women's rights to a degree, we're starting to see, or hear reports at least, that things might not be as rosy as they suggest. People being tarred in Kabul, women pleading to get out because they say the Taliban are after them. So do you think there are, there's a situation where chaotic scene in Afghanistan and the Taliban bringing in certain treatment of minorities could change the American audience reaction? Or do you think it really has to be something more on home soil?
I fear it would have to be more domestically affecting America or Americans than actually what's unfortunately going on in terms of human rights and misogyny inside Afghanistan, to be quite honest. Let's wait and see. But I think for many Americans, they've been there a long time. They've lost thousands of lives. They haven't been able to. They've spent trillions. The current zeitgeist is to pull back and, of course, focus on China and Russia.
And Freddie, how is this landing within the Democratic Party? Because ultimately with the Democrats, you have seen some, I think, natural supporters of Joe Biden horrified, saying that this is out of the Trump playbook. So is this going to damage him internally, even if not when it comes to the mass audience?
I think it will certainly divide them internally. I mean, if you look at the pro-Israeli side of the Democratic Party, they're certainly anxious about the way geopolitics is moving in the region. However, I also think that people within the Biden administration spot the political opportunity that this presents in the midterms, and that's that it splits a slightly strange coalition that formed in the Trump years between a sort of anti-right, anti-war voter base on the right and a very hawkish, pro-interventionist strand within the Republican Party. So Trump was successful through Mike Pompeo, his Secretary of State. He was successful in wooing the sort of people who wanted to tear up the deal with Iran, who wanted to rattle their sabers at Iran and North Korea, but he managed to not get involved in a war. At the same time, he was successful in appealing to people who wanted to end the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, but he never actually really ended them. By going a little bit further, by actually ending this war in Afghanistan, Biden has sort of exposed a lot of kind of semi-Trumpist Republicans as being slightly fraudulent. You've heard a lot of people in recent days who just a year ago were saying we've got to do whatever it takes to end the endless wars, now criticising Biden for doing exactly that. He's exposed a rift in the Republican Party, and that could present some opportunities for Democrats.
And finally, it's fair to say that the majority of both Democrat voters and Republican voters say they support ultimately leaving Afghanistan. So not perhaps in this way, but that's what they support.
So Ben, do you think actually in a way this could put the Republicans in a tough position?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what are they now going to say? He's now done the thing that Donald Trump started. Oh dear, we don't like it. I mean, no. So I don't think it's going to give him, a lot of. He's not going to lose sleep over the Republican position or where they might now go.
The only thing I'd add is the incompetence factor. Because Biden's starting to look slightly incompetent on other fronts. If you look at inflation, if you look at the border, if there's a sort of general sense that Biden doesn't know what he's doing. And that he's making a mess of everything, that could start to hurt him. But Ben's absolutely right in terms of the principles at the moment. The polls would suggest the public are on his side.
And it's very different than Carter in 79 or Iran or hostages or anything like that at the moment.
And just finally, I wanted to speak to you very briefly about the special relationship. Freddie, we have a situation where today in the Commons chamber, you had Tory MPs questioning the UK's reliance on the US, criticising the fact that ultimately once the US makes a decision at the moment, the UK seems to have to fall into line even if they disagree. What do you think is happening with the relationship between Biden and Boris? Do you think that we are seeing a weaker relationship than previously, or is it beyond that?
I don't think there's a lot of communication between the two administrations on key points. On what we've seen in Parliament today, I'd like to make a quite boringly cynical point that I just think cameras in Parliament are a bad idea, because we saw this with Hillary Benn and Syria, and the whole media framing of every parliamentary debate about foreign affairs becomes about sort of the one big speech where some politician gets a sort of wobbly lip, says something emotional, gets a bit passionate, maybe Churchillian, and everybody says, wasn't this this is what being a parliamentarian is all about. I don't think it is. I think being a parliamentarian is about trying to sort of decide what the British government should do, not performing for social media.
Ben?
Well, I mean, people, whatever they say, they like the performative stuff going on in Parliament, and it brings it to life. What we have seen is the public, and the British public, are much more critical of America than clearly the American public, and in fact, by some margin, say that it was, we say it was wrong for the Americans to leave. And I guess reflecting to a certain extent the way we feel beholden to them. But again, the British public still really value the special relationship and all of the heritage, history and things that it symbolises. So again, I don't think the price of fish hasn't really changed on that yet. It's just a statement of fact, really, what has happened.
I've got to add, though, I think it is, I mean, I don't want to sound like a self-hating Brit, I'm not, but it's quite easy for us to talk about what America should do in Afghanistan. We haven't really done anything in Afghanistan for 10 years. It's not really our problem anymore. Would you not agree with that, Ben?
I think yes, but we've lost over 450 lives in Afghanistan. We've had troops there, yes, not as many as America, etc. So I think, again, and the British remain incredibly proud of our armed forces. You can see that people want the veterans to be treated fairly, and there is that same sort of general sense of what was it, why did we do that, what was it all for? So the British want to see us getting involved in humanitarian aid. Most people want to see us taking lots of refugees. Only 18% of people in Britain, despite often being anti-immigrant generally, only 18% say they don't want any Afghans coming here at all. And for everybody else, the majority say if they've worked with us, we need to look after them now and step in. We aren't particularly keen on more military action. It clearly hasn't worked very much, but we want Britain to be engaged, and that's the path the government will now have to tread, I guess. And and I think it's a really interesting challenge with America withdrawing. It's a big reminder to Europe, with or without Britain, that it needs to step up to the plate on some of this stuff. We need a global policeman of some kind, potentially. And if America is not going to do as much of it, what is Europe going to do? And I think that's another thing that will be raised from all of this.
Freddy, Ben, thank you for joining us.